Ladies and gentlemen, the chair now recognizes Lawrence King, Jr., a member of the Nebraska delegation, for the singing of the national anthem.
And we're live, and we are pleased to welcome a very special guest, author of The Franklin Scandal and Confessions of a DC Madam and The Truth About Watergate, Nick Bryant. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be on your show, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, I said before we started that I'm a little starstruck to be talking to you. Like, this is very exciting for me to get to ask you questions and talk to you about your work, because just to get out front of this, Nick has done like some of the most groundbreaking and like honestly a most amazing journalism work done in the last 30 years, certainly. And I would say, as far as integrity goes, is up there all time, in my opinion. So not to wash your balls too much, Nick, but I just gotta say,
I'm sure that there are people that would disagree with you. So
yeah, well, they're feds. But Nick, so the Franklin Scandal is I just finished reading it for the definitive time for the show, and I have so many questions, but I guess what should we start with, William?
Well, I wanted to
I'm dominating this.
Yeah, well, when I first read it, I've just read it again, but when I first read it, I was also reading Program to Kill by Dave McGowan. I was just wondering what if you got any comments to make about how they overlap, because it's very, very
considerable
mind-blowing when you're reading both of them at the same time.
Yeah, that would spark some nightmares for sure.
Yeah.
Program to Kill has got some amazing scholarship in it.
Yes.
The way that Dave pulled together all these serial killers and showed that a lot of them had a prior existence, either in the Phoenix program or some kind of MK Ultra program.
Right.
And that's pretty amazing. We both he focused on the finders early on in Program to Kill, and I also focused on the finders.
Yeah.
And I think of Dave's 4 books, Program to Kill is by far his best.
It's the only one of his I've read. I've read
2 of his books, and I do find it to be the better of the 2 that I've read, in my opinion.
It's kind of, it alters the way you look at the world, doesn't it? How does that sit with you? I mean, I listen to your podcast regularly.
Same.
And I know that, well, you are the consummate journalist, and you're very good at getting different kinds of sources to open up to you by not arguing with them or contradicting with them or whatever. And I get that, but
a very professional interview style. Which I respect,
which is very rare and which you're not going to get here.
Yeah.
But it certainly doesn't make me much money, but I'm glad that there are people enjoying it.
Yeah. So yeah, I've heard you say on there that you and I think you kind of frame it that way in the book, and I get it, but that the you see it as like a corrupt subset of the federal government that's carries on in the ways detailed in the Franklin scandal and commits these covers up. Well, I guess that works, but
I would say that it's a dark. There's a dark, malignant corner of the government that does this. So I'm sure that there are lots of people that work for the CIA that don't even have a clue about things like Franklin and Program to Kill, and actually probably don't even realize that Epstein is an intelligence operation. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people in the FBI. However, I know that there are people. When I was working on the Franklin scandal, there were a couple of people in the Department of Justice that I cultivated.
Right.
And they knew what was going on, but I had to cultivate a relationship with them for 2 years before they trusted me. They knew what was going on, but they also had good jobs.
Yeah.
And they did not want, at the very worst, to get canned and not be able to make their mortgage payments, their house payments, their kids' college, all those things. But it could be worse than that too. So
yeah. I mean, that's what the first thing you were talking about there, the sort of financial barrel everybody's over, is a key
precarity, sense of precarity. Yeah,
it's a key component of how this system works, in which things like this can be got away with.
And then there's a lot of people who will make Faustian pacts, not necessarily because they're compromised, but because they want power. They want prestige, money, power, and prestige. That drives a lot of people.
Yeah, like the social psychology of just getting to the top of a tree, or as close to the top of the tree as they can get, and they don't care what kind of tree it is.
Obedience to authority experiment.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
There were
they zap people, and then they actually had an actor pretending
because they couldn't answer the right question, and then the subjects would have to incrementally go up on the electricity. And at the end, they thought they were delivering lethal doses of electricity because the person on the other side of the wall couldn't answer questions. And people would say, well, that wouldn't be me. That wouldn't be me. But actually, 68% of the individuals, they were males between 25 and 50, delivered a lethal dose of electricity because someone told them to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And another thing I wanted to say is, like, all those accolades I gave you a minute before, which, by the way, I stand by, of course, but and I would say that I would be remiss to mention that you for all that hard work and integrity that I mentioned before that you have, your reward for this is not a star, and I don't mean this, don't take this the wrong way. It's not being like the cover of, you didn't win the Pulitzer for this. You're talking to us. That is shameful. Is how your industry has treated you, in spite of all the work and integrity that you've displayed.
That brings us onto like the lengths they've had to go to silence you. I mean, I'm just glad they didn't go further. But, like, for instance, there's no Wikipedia entry for Larry King, which is just wild.
True. Well, the Wikipedia entry for the Franklin child abuse allegations is nonsensical, like children eating feces and things like that. And if you go to the talk section, it's right on my website. I show just how draconian those quote unquote editors are. It's like Omaha Beach in 1944. They're not going to give an inch.
No.
And I think it's hurt me in Hollywood because people in Hollywood don't read. They just Google things.
Yeah.
And then they Google Franklin, and then they say, oh, wow, kids eating feces and stuff.
Yeah,
this is
I'll
not them.
pass. Yeah.
Yeah.
This sort of springboards me onto another thing that I definitely wanted to get to, which is, where is the stylishly shot Ryan Gosling as Nick Bryant adaptation of the Franklin Scandal with a hip indie rock soundtrack? Where is that, and why haven't we gotten it yet?
Yeah.
I've had a really hard time in Hollywood. It's generally been the person at the apex of a studio that is ultimately, I've had a lot of executive vice presidents interested in my work.
Right.
But
and it gets to the big guy, and they're
it's
all
always the
compromised.
person at the very top that vetoes it.
Yeah.
Yep. That checks out in my brain.
And that's been very frustrating, because I've had executive vice presidents apologize to me.
Yeah.
Say, I really wanted to do this, but my boss just won't let me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it says, I have this sort of pet, because we sort of straddle, we're at the center of a very peculiar Venn diagram. And we have people on the show who are kind of interested in comic books and the media that comes off from that. And they on their shows are always ranting about, why do they keep making all these updated comic book movies that nobody likes and that continue to lose billions of dollars. And my take on that is that, well, at this point of what I call it, whatever you like, late stage capitalism or whatever you want to call it, the movie studios aren't really there to make money. They're actually there to change you. That we are now the products, like with the data harvesting and all that. And
right.
They're just trying to.
We're the commodity, if you will.
Yeah. They're literally, everything's owned by the same few banks, and they're using their cinematic arm to alter the people into just more effective consumers, to secure more debt, ever more unsustainable levels of debt with the bit of real estate that they own.
It's 6 corporations own 90% of the media.
Yeah.
Yes.
That Americans imbibe. So, and those 6 corporations are titanic.
Yeah.
They could easily be broken up with the Sherman Antitrust Act. But there's obviously a détente between those 6 conglomerates and the government. I believe anyway. The
regulatory capture.
Well, it's obvious. I mean, it's like it works both ways, isn't it? They own the government, and the government owns them. It's like I coined the term global fascism, because it's just like fascism, but without the nationalism.
There's never been a government quite like ours. It's an iron fist with a velvet glove.
Yeah, we've used that as same metaphor before, actually.
And the thing about it is, George Orwell was wrong. He said that there was going to be Big Brother, but actually we have 6 corporations that own 90% of the media that give me a tremendous amount of choice on television.
Right.
I mean, I can watch 500 channels if I want.
Right. Of slop. Yes.
But they're owned by a very small number of corporations who control what.
And I'll take that one step further, Nick, is that all those 9 corporations you mentioned, all of their debt is owned by even fewer financial institutions. And ultimately, why would the chain somewhere along the chain, the message change?
Yeah.
It's at this point, I think America is an empire in decline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't think of the guy's name, but his thesis was that when there's an empire in decline, that empire becomes fixated on 3 things: sex, sports, and food.
Yeah.
And
well,
if you look at America, I mean, the NFL is a religion. I mean, it's an opiate. Now chefs have their own channels, probably pretty soon their own stations.
Yeah.
And sex, I mean,
it's off the hook.
I mean,
it's off the charts.
Anybody can tap into in almost indefinite supply of pornography with their iPhone. I mean,
right. Which, by the way, is just there's a nice Venn diagram between the work that you do and the pornography industry. All those people are people who were usually victims of sexual exploitation as children.
Well, the average age of entry into the sex industry is 13 years old.
That is horrifying.
So when guys are watching these porno actresses that are 18 or older, chances are they're just perpetuating the damage that was done by a pedophile.
Sure, yeah. It certainly doesn't look like it's their first rodeo, does it?
It's but that is a message that's completely lost on people, that that children enter the sex industry at 13 years old.
You are preaching to the converted, by the way, for the record, and like we make no bones about our stance on that for sure. Like definitely that is just another arm of the same monster that all of your work is based around, which is just the sexual exploitation of children for profit and power.
Well, it's an opiate. Pornography is an opiate, and I think it might even be more effective than the NFL because it's so ubiquitous. Anybody with
you have to pay to watch the NFL, don't you?
Yeah.
No, you don't, but that is a good point, though. It is free. The pornography is free. I should mention this. I've said this before in the show, but Nick, I think you'll appreciate this. I've said before on the show that I do not view pornography as a choice. And I've noticed in the more recent years, like just razor commercials for women's razors have become so graphic. Yeah. To the point where I'm like, whoa, my eyes are popping out of my head, not in necessarily a good way either. On just a commercial that's been primetime television selling a women's, hygiene product. But I think to me, who I don't look at that stuff, so therefore it's more rare that I see like that kind of area on a woman. So. But I think most people are going through their day being like, yeah, I already busted earlier today looking at something way more messed up than this. So
well, I can speak to this as like a European, as it were, of reasonably advanced years, because it's changed so much. But when I was a kid and I would go to like just a regular high school, you'd go on a school trip to France, and they had advertising like that in France in the 70s and 80s already. And in Germany, but they're like defeated nations that have been marched over by armies, and all the women have been turned into prostitutes that way. Whereas in England, it wasn't like that. And then all of a sudden, at some point in the 90s, hardcore pornography went from being literally illegal and impossible to get to being free and basically compulsory. And then in recent years, the British government decided that they were going to appeal to a certain section of the electorate by bringing in restrictions on age verification for viewers of pornography on the internet. And that they announced it, and they said, right, it starts tomorrow, and it just never happened. And I think that's the power that's behind that, is that even national governments are powerless to resist this ubiquitous industry. Yeah.
It's something that pornography is highly addictive, and people get addicted to it. A lot of people get addicted to it. People from all socioeconomic strata get addicted to it. And I believe that it's a very tough addiction to actually transcend. But all addictions are tough to transcend. But yes, it becomes something that's highly addictive, and it seems innocuous because it's working through pixels, but it's not innocuous. It can be very deleterious.
Right.
Agreed.
But let's get back to your work, though. I wanted to do a couple things. First of all, I want to ask you this, and I wanted you to weigh in on this. I am a firm believer that the gentleman wearing the cowboy hat's name is Troy Boner, but I've heard it many times as Troy Bonner. But I do point to a piece of evidence contained within your book is the affidavit given by a member of the Omaha community who had he said that he employed several members of the Boner family, and he was confused by the news referring to him as Bonner because he always called them Boner. Therefore, to me that says that the name is Troy Boner.
Actually, it's Troy Bonner.
Right.
It is okay.
I've got that from many good sources. So
Okay.
poor Troy. He had a horrible life, and he had a very ugly death.
Yes, I didn't want to diminish any of his experiences. Yeah, very hard life. In fact, I wanted to bring up specifically a quote from him in his lie or die affidavit, or was it deposition? Affidavit.
Affidavit, yeah.
Yeah. One of this quote really struck me. For those, I mean, I'll give a brief intro to it, but Troy Bonner definitively was one of the child prostitutes employed by Lawrence E. King Jr.'s interstate pedophilia and drug ring, prostitution ring. He had been compelled by the federal authorities to withdraw his allegations of his experiences in order to help convict Alicia Owen of perjury, false, even though she was telling the truth. At some point after her conviction, he had a change of heart, and he made a statement to former Senator John DeCamp about how he was recanting his recantation, and it's loosely referred to as the lie or die affidavit. And one of the quotes in it was that he said, and this really hit me very emotionally, was he was talking about you're probably going to say, like, why should we listen to you? I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But I'm a drug addict. I've been convicted of crimes. I've done sexual favors for money. But I want you to know that the people who did this to us made us sexual perverts, and made us addicted to drugs. And that is it's so heartbreaking to see, like, a guy who's so conflicted over whether he's going to tell the truth or not, and ultimately, like, just the raw fear of intimidation by the federal government and the FBI was enough to just scare him away from his what he obviously had in him, the conscience to know that he had to tell the truth. But it's just so heartbreaking that that happened.
It was actually, he had, after he'd written that affidavit, Alicia Owen and her husband and the Owens and John DeCamp were in the courthouse, and Troy was going to testify that he had lied at the grand juries and also at Alicia's trial. And all of a sudden, he was in the courthouse, right? He was swooped up. Robert Ziegler, who was the assistant Douglas deputy county prosecutor, who is now an assistant U.S. attorney. Troy was brought into a room. The door was locked, and Troy was told, if you tell the truth, you're going to go to jail for perjury. And that was the end of Troy. Actually, that was the end of his gumption.
Yeah.
Because when he was called, he just took the fifth. And his life spiraled downward. His brother died under mysterious circumstances. Yeah. I mean, the family certainly felt that that his brother was murdered, and Troy died under very lurid, mysterious circumstances too. It was when you're talking about networks like that, and we saw it with the Epstein network. The kids generally come from dysfunctional families.
Right.
And then they're turned on to drugs if they perform well. So they become drug addicts. They're repeatedly molested. They're from dysfunctional families. And then at a certain point, they lose their marketability, their youthful marketability. And then they're just expunged. And then at that point, you've got a drug addict and a felon. And who's going to believe a drug addict and a felon?
Right.
Against a senator or someone in the cabinet or
a cop.
a mayor or a governor.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
police chief.
Or a police chief. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that it's a perfect system that way, that these kids go on to compromise their own integrity.
Well, it's but one of the sort of, from the point of view of the perpetrators, one of the beneficial effects of the ordeal that they subject these children to is that it de facto makes them into an unreliable witness, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's truly a horrific thing. We saw it in Franklin. We've seen it in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
We've seen it with Epstein. Attack the victim.
Yeah. Well, I think that it is, and honestly, we sort of come across a lot of kind of, I mean, I guess we are kind of a right-wing conspiracy podcast, but we're not the sort that just buys into everything, like, you know,
Right. Flat Earth.
Whatever. Yeah. Stop eating bread, whatever.
Yeah.
But they so I'm kind of have a knee-jerk skepticism towards these, we call them rightoid conspiracy takes, where and one of those is, oh, this is a battle of good against evil, and you know, this is demonic forces and such and such. But from reading your book and Program to Kill, I think there's something to that. I actually think I've come round to that way of thinking. Actually, one of the passages in the Franklin scandal that really touched me the last time I read it was where you ascribe, in a way, that it was Alicia Owen's genuine faith that kind of got her into trouble by making her stick to telling the truth, but it also saved her in a kind of, I mean, to me, she's a bit like a Sarah Weaver type of figure, how she's just come through this with amazing dignity and strength after all that.
Yeah, Alicia is an amazing person. Most people would have thrown in the towel and recanted their accounts of their abuse. And the government really tried to punish her by putting her in solitary confinement for 2 years.
Right.
2 years.
Brutal.
And that generally deconstructs people psychologically. But
Bradley Manning, anyone?
Yeah.
But she's got a good life. She's happily married. She's an amazing person. I love her deeply.
Yeah, she seems like she came out okay, honestly. And I've seen a couple of your conversations with her on your podcast, and she seems like has amazing spirits. And I have to assume that there is a non-zero amount of the faith that you have ascribed in your book that attributed to that.
Yeah, I don't think you can do that without having faith, and without, because it's like you're constantly being. It is like to get sort of quasi biblical. It's like a constant temptation of you can make this stop. You've just got to play the game, but sticking to the straight and narrow path of telling the truth is just awesome. And she's like been through purgatory and come out of the other side, and it's great to see that she did come out of the other side by sticking to the truth and the way.
Well, it's ironic. The two people that didn't recant, Paul Benassi and Alicia Owen, have been able to forge lives for themselves. And Troy Bonner's dead. And I have no idea where Danny King is, but I wouldn't be surprised if he were dead. And then a lot of the kids that didn't come forward are probably dead too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a short life expectancy for anybody who gets into that kind of thing in the first, gets sucked into that kind of thing in the first place.
Drugs are just a hell of a thing. Honestly, just in my age group, they weren't involved, to my knowledge, in any sort of interstate pedophilia pimping ring, but I have a high death rate in people who are in my graduating class just from drugs. So it's a really, and then also, I mean, the Franklin scandal is like sort of a Frankenstein's monster created by the CIA, basically. But who do you think brought all the drugs into the country, by the way?
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a tremendous amount of research in that area. Although it's really interesting, the mainstream media has pretty much stayed away from it.
Sure.
America, with Tom Cruise, took a step towards
the Mockingbird media, you say?
it took a step towards actualizing. I mean, Barry Seal was in the CIA long before the movie said that he was, but to bring his story and kind of mix the CIA and it's a step in the right direction. I mean, it's not the truth,
right?
But it's a step in the right direction.
It's at least based on something true.
Yes.
Based on a true story. I mean, that is the meme, isn't it?
It's the story of Barry Seal is it's a pretty interesting story, but again, it's that dark, malignant corner of our government, of the U.S. government, and the British has a dark, malignant corner. I'm sure that every country has a dark, malignant corner of intelligence.
Well, I think the British is probably as pervasively dark and malignant as any intelligence thing could be. I mean, from what I understand, they deliberately provoked World War One, which is what got us into this fine mess we're in now. So it's not very cool, is it? But I mean, it was without the knowledge of the Parliament per se, which is supposed to be the supreme power in the UK. But...
Right? Yeah.
When you like with the Perfumo scandal in the UK, when you compromise politicians the way that our politicians have been compromised, they're their own. The Epstein network, the Franklin network. If you get busted,
I think your sound has got quiet and then gone.
Yeah,
Nick, we don't have any sound from you.
We can't hear you at this moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can perfectly.
Loud and proud now. Yeah.
Where did I drop off?
You were talking about Perfumo and how the politicians are no good if the
the Perfumo scandal. I mean, the sexual blackmail has been part of politics forever.
Right.
Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old who was married, and her husband was blackmailing Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
And he was outed, that his affair was outed by a muckraking journalist who thought that Thomas Jefferson, when Thomas Jefferson became president, thought that Thomas Jefferson owed him an appointment for outing Alexander Hamilton. And Jefferson didn't give him an appointment, and he outed Jefferson for having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, which genetics have shown to be genetic testing has shown to be true. Yeah. So it's been around for a long time. Now you've got pinhole cameras, which make all the difference in the world. As far as anybody can be compromised just about anywhere, and actually with the data mining too. Anybody can be compromised.
The Vault 7 disclosures, where basically they're like, yeah, we have a backdoor entry to everybody's phone ever, all time history. Just all we got to do is punch your name in.
Yeah.
And what's really troubling is that Americans have put up with this.
Yeah.
They become so anesthetized, they're debt slaves, and they're anesthetized by television. 60% of them are obese. It's truly unfortunate.
Hey, don't come at our audience like that.
Well, I would say that not more than 40% of your audience is obese.
That is a very generous thing, Nick. We will take that.
Our guys are just beautiful.
Yeah, they're jacked, actually.
So that's the problem that we have, is this apathy. And
agree.
And we're going to have to, if we're going to change it around, we're going to have to become less apathetic.
Right. Well, you've had some success with that, with vis-a-vis Larry King, by the way, have you not?
Well, I've been able to get him thrown out of organizations that would have given him access to children.
Yeah, bravo to that end. That is a heroic act you did.
It's very strange. There are people in the federal government that know that he's a super predator.
Of course.
But yet they're completely cool with him accessing children through these various organizations. And it's a journalist that has to separate him from molesting children. I mean, that shows you how ugly it's got.
Well, that brings us back full circle to sort of polishing your balls again. Is that like so like you've obviously got the journalistic chops to I mean, I guess you are known all over the world because of the work you've done yourself, but you've had to do it yourself.
Right. With
Doing
no help. Yeah.
doing stuff like you do, which is actually taking the job of being a journalist seriously and just reporting the facts, which is awesome how your book does that. And I mean, it should be how it's the way it's done by everybody, shouldn't it? But it's just so not. It's just sad that
It's the
if
absolute
you
state
do
of
your
journalism.
you do your job properly and you're punished for it.
Well, a good friend of mine was an editor at a major magazine.
Right. You mentioned him in the book, but you didn't mention the magazine,
No.
which is okay.
Yeah.
And he couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
Really?
Because the people at that magazine, they didn't even know they were on a reservation. He knew he was on the reservation.
Yeah.
Right.
And not to stray off, but it reached a point, and his boss, and I still find this mind-boggling to this day, his boss, the editor-in-chief of a major magazine in the United States of America, a bellwether of liberal thought,
Yeah.
Right.
his boss did not think that people were blackmailed.
Wow.
That is absurd. Hasn't he been blackmailed? I'm sure.
His boss felt that there was no blackmail whatsoever with Jeffrey Epstein, which
wow.
when you're dealing with that kind of, I mean, and I don't even think she was compromised. She was just ignorant. And when you're dealing with that kind of ignorance, you need a certain mindset to excel in the media.
Yeah.
And I just don't have that. I've been a freelance writer we're coming up on 29 years. I don't know how I've been able to make a living, but I somehow have been able to make a living. And but I know that I could not join the staff of a magazine, of a mainstream magazine. I mean, well, they definitely wouldn't hire me.
Yeah.
But
you wouldn't like it either.
Yeah. But even if they hired me, I'd probably then, after like half an hour, they'd probably say.
After a few rejections for proposals for papers or for pieces you wanted to do were rejected, you'd be like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, fortunately, I've just never tried it. I mean, dealing with magazine editors for all the years that I've dealt with them,
of course, yeah.
And a lot of them just had fear in their eyes. Because the magazine, if you're editor-in-chief of a magazine in New York City, you're making anywhere from $250,000 a year to over $1 million.
Right. So that's like an 8x8 cell, basically.
Yes.
In New York City.
And I'm sure that a lot of the people that are in publishing in New York City are compromised, or they're just willing to make a Faustian pact.
Right.
A lot of people just want, as I said earlier, money, power, and prestige.
Yeah. So you've got a recent-ish book out about. I think it's actually very recent in England. A book about Watergate.
That's coming out in a couple of months.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right,
Well, that explains why I haven't read it yet, then, Nick.
I think that's going to be a very good book.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I'm excited about it. Yeah. We were dragged into doing another Watergate episode. And I was like, can we just wait till Nick Bryant's book comes out on it?
What's interesting, at the heart of Watergate is a CIA sexual honey trap.
Yeah.
Blackmail operation at the heart of it. And I'm amazed that has not entered the narrative.
Yeah, it's salacious.
What jumps out at me about the narrative of Watergate is that, like, when we were researching a recent episode, was that this young journalist straight out of the Navy, who's just a beginner, happens to meet this
enigmatic
senior spy, and then the story we're expected to believe is that he duped him into cooperating with his hard-hitting journalism. It's like, come on, man.
Are you really that narcissistic to think that you were the special one in the relationship between you and what's his name there?
Yeah, actually, Deep Throat was a composite, but if you go to my website and read Balderdash Bob and Deep Throat, I really deconstructed.
Yeah.
And I show that Mark Felt, although I'm
Mark
sure he
Felt, right.
provided information to Woodward, did not provide the most damaging information. And plus, Mark Felt, I get a kick out of this.
Yeah.
He had been fired 6 months before into the Watergate reporting. So Woodward was supposedly Mark Felt would drive by Woodward's place, and if Woodward had the flower pot out,
Right. Love this.
but he had been fired for 6 months, and prior to, I think that the last was November, so I think he was fired in May, June or May. So we're to believe now that Mark Felt drove in from Virginia every day looking at Bob Woodward's patio. And the thing about it is, Bob Woodward's patio faced a courtyard. So
he would have to get out of the car and conspicuously walk into someone's yard. Yeah.
No. Well, it was more than that. You had to climb some fences. I mean, it was
that's crazy.
It was pretty bizarre. Yeah.
What a narcissist Bob Woodward is.
Bob Woodward is a spook, and he's done very well as a spook. But Carl Bernstein is an ethical eunuch. Well, Woodward is too. But I think that their day is coming. I really do. There's they told lies when they didn't even need to tell lies. That's what surprised me about those two guys. Is that
they never thought there'd be a bunch of autistic guys online checking their work either. Like later.
But all the good guys in Watergate, I mean, John Dean is a lying sociopath, and so is Alexander Haig. These are the good guys of Watergate. The guys that saved us from Nixon and his unholy minions.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank God. Yeah. It's just so funny that something we've been talking about lately is like the fact that like the media as we know it is just like sort of, it's whatever the CIA sort of like allows to be. Essentially they build the narrative, and then the journalists pick up the cues and go, okay, we're just going to fill in all the lines here. So, pretty much.
What's your take on this, Nick? I feel like I've heard Nixon himself say that, oh well, look, I just wanted to end the war in Vietnam. Do you think that there's something to that was his real? Because I think you can do whatever you want with fiscal policy or whatever within a certain regions, and the CIA doesn't care. But if you start maybe, I know he escalated the war, but maybe that was him just trying to save himself. I think that's what he is trying to portray. What do you think?
What happened there was Nixon had been a cold warrior for a number of decades. He had actually been on the House on Un-American activities. McCarthy, and so he was firmly in the dominion of the Hawks.
Yeah.
And he had kind of come to the realization that didn't work.
Right.
So when on his first day of the presidency, he issued National Security Memorandum 2, I believe it's called. And basically what he said there is that the CIA, the State Department, and the Department of Defense will have actually no ability or no responsibility in his geopolitical moves. He completely cut them out.
Right.
And
so he had to go,
yeah.
So because what he wanted to do, he was doing strategic arm limitation talks with the Russians, and he was opening up China, rapprochement with China.
Yeah.
So he just X'd out the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the State Department. And actually it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff that had an espionage ring against him. And it was called the Moore-Radford affair. And the administration eventually caught on to this espionage ring against Nixon, and they stopped it. But then at that point, the CIA had just been infiltrating his administration, very much like the last scene of Scarface when the Bolivian drug lord sends all the assassins. That's how it was with the CIA and Nixon.
But it's funny, they let him open up China because their friends in the banks could make bank off that. but they don't want them cutting into the defense spending.
Well, Nixon told Russia
boondoggle.
that he was willing to relinquish Vietnam
Right.
if Russia was willing to engage in strategic arm limitation talks. I think that was one of the things that, I mean, just his complete refusal to listen to the CIA or the State Department, the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, Kennedy had been assassinated in 1963. And by 1968, that Warren Commission report had come out. And and the number of Americans that believed in a conspiracy was up to like almost 80% at that point.
Yeah. I believe that.
I mean, and despite all the mainstream media that has shown us how the magic bullet had 7 entry points and it's still pristine, still, I think 62% of Americans believe that it was a conspiracy.
Yeah,
so
Americans know too much about ballistics to fall for that kind of.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
Americans are fond of their guns for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so funny. About Nixon. Yeah, he was based, I guess. He really was just awesome. Like,
well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, he was really crazy.
I know.
But
it is a bit, for sure. But I think it's very funny to hear you say those things. Because I know anything that comes out of your mouth, Nick, is true. It's just so funny the way that the media, and I mentioned before, like the framing of these people, these figures, I should say, in history is like, yeah, this paranoid psycho who sent the FBI after John Lennon. Yeah. Like he was that paranoid. He had to send them after John Lennon. That's what you like. If you Google Richard Nixon, that's what comes up. Like, not that he was, not National Security Memorandum 2.
Yeah, well, it's like.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, going back to Program to Kill, the way McGowan presents that book, the information in that book it's kind of like a rhythm. So this guy did this line of work, and then he went into the Air Force in Germany, and then he went into hospital, and he got discharged with full benefits. You keep hearing the same thing over and over again. They don't want you hearing that, Nixon got rid of for, Kennedy got rid of for threatening the military budget. Nixon got the same, and then you could say, well, his apologists would say the same thing about Trump.
The CIA got very lucky with Watergate. Yeah. And what's kind of interesting, there were 2 break-ins, and the Watergate, the Democratic National Committee was on the 8th floor of the Watergate, and the Federal Reserve Board was on the 6th floor. Or the Federal Reserve Board was on the 8th floor, the DNC was on the 6th floor. And McCord, who led the burglars, at midnight, walked in and signed into the Federal Reserve Board. Right. and the security guard was brain dead. I mean, he really was. I get into that in the book. And he just let him sign in. And then they did it again, and they were worried that he was going to be too brain dead again. So McCord had a guy named Alfred Baldwin call a DC cop who was also an intelligence officer named Carl Schaffler to say, okay, now you guys got to arrest him.
Right.
Because had they just left it to that security guard, then nothing ever would have happened.
Right.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
And that's like that moment, and we've all seen the crappy movie starring Robert Redford, where it's like it's a big dramatic scene where like they're cuffing the Watergate burglars and stuff, and it's like, no, I don't think that is how it happened.
Well, what's interesting with that is the burglars there were a couple of different things going on with Watergate, but the burglars had their photography equipment set up on the desk of a woman named Maxie Wells. She was the secretary of the DNC, and in her desk was an album of prostitutes, and Democratic big shots would come in and look at the album, and then they would pick out a prostitute. And then the prostitutes were at Columbia Plaza, which was an upscale apartment building. And that place was wired for audiovisual blackmail. So the burglars had their equipment set up on Maxie Wells's desk, and one of them, Eugenia Martinez, had a key to the desk where she kept the album of prostitutes.
That's crazy.
So, and the FBI withheld that information for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when did they disclose that?
I'm not exactly sure. It's in Jim Haugen's secret agenda.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly how we got it, but he did get it.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you make of the FBI accidentally leaking accidentally including the McMartin's preschool tunnel plan in with the
Finders papers?
In with the Finders papers? And what do you make of them even releasing all that?
That was pretty bizarre, although the Finders had been pretty heavily sanitized.
Yeah.
And then there was that FBI agent who was basically called Ramon Martinez a liar. Ramon Martinez was the U.S. Customs agent that wrote that really, really bizarre, horrific report on the Finders. And she basically called Ramon Martinez a liar. He had no
psychological tricks.
I mean, he had no reason to lie when he wrote that. I mean, why would he write something that bizarre?
Yeah.
Right.
He wasn't psychotic. He wasn't on hallucinogens. I mean, that whole thing is so. I
feel like he was somewhat conservative in his assessment of it. Like there's certain parts of it that led me to believe that the facility that they'd gone to in DC there, the warehouse, it seemed to me like that was also possibly rigged up audiovisual for blackmail, possibly.
Yes, it's
I'm
the
speculating.
The Finders, it's there's still a lot of unanswered questions about the Finders.
Yeah.
Right.
But like Marion Petty had done a wonderful job of infiltrating various left-wing organizations.
Yeah.
And that's it. And in a time when the CIA was funding both left and right organizations.
Yeah.
Marion Petty, in those, I am something of a Finders scholar myself. I read through every page of that FBI disclosure. That kind of got me on the fast track to Nick Bryant land, actually. Was reading all that. But what's it called? I noticed in there, and not many people bring this up, but Marion Petty was he chaired, I have it written here. He chaired an organization called the Cubans for patriotism or something. And he was it says in this CIA documentation, or sorry, FBI documentation, that he had something to do with getting Lee Harvey Oswald into Cuba. Marion Petty. It says there. It's disclosed in the Finders papers.
It's the Finders had a lot of tentacles. I did a show, a podcast about a month and a half ago on the Finders, and we looked at a number of different dimensions of the Finders. The Finders was quite the octopus, and
yeah, but one of the things that really sticks in my head about that customs report is that he mentions that, they had a full report on the arrest that happened in Florida last night.
Yeah, from the telex. They got a telex, like sort of BBS forum relation from the guy who was in the van, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were very high tech. There's so much more about the Finders that I would like to know, and a lot of other people that know about the Finders would like to know. That document dump of Finders documentation, unfortunately, it was extremely sanitized, but it's kind of interesting.
You got to play cryptograms a little bit.
Well, the fact that it was released shows that a lot of people have become aware of the Finders.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that it was a preemptive strike before it wended its way into the mainstream media.
Yeah, and you start to, it makes you start to see the overall pattern. It's that you can see why it's a way of squelching it, isn't it? Because like people start to, because it, and the fact that they left that signpost to the McMartin preschool in it, and that it's like the any sort of signpost to, is it, what's his name, Michael Aquino and stuff like that.
Michael Aquino, yeah.
Yeah, it's like how
I
he
did
was
a
involved.
podcast on McMartin
Yeah, I don't think I've heard that one.
with Ross Chait, and he spent years looking into McMartin.
Yeah,
And he's a professor, political science professor at Brown University.
but it's
And he definitely shows in his book, he takes a look at a lot of the child abuse scandals and calls it the witch hunt narrative. But there were definitely children that were sexually abused.
And what do you make of Nathan Greenberg? He's a concrete connection between McMartin and the Finders, because he was he advised the prosecution of the he advised the defense of the McMartins, and sort of provided the implanted memories explanation. And then also after that, he was consulted with the Florida Health and Human Services inquisition into the kids' well-being after being taken away from the van. And he, even though there were like medical doctors who were saying that that the kids had physical evidence of being sexually abused, or two of the kids specifically.
Yeah, there were two. There was a doctor that said two of them had been abused.
Right. But Greenberg was the de facto sort of like, nope, I'm the authority on it. And that, I just thought it was very, very telling that it was the same guy between the Finders and the McMartin. It's almost like he was deployed like as a cover guy.
Yeah, he's the go-to guy.
What's interesting is some of these guys just keep showing up, like Jolly West. Shows up, and well, it was definitely
the MLK assassin thing. He was he advised on.
Sort of
actually, it was Jack Ruby. It was Jack
both, Ruby. I believe. Both, I believe.
Yeah, and he was in the scene with Manson. He had an office in that clinic where Manson would hang out. And he was also on the board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, even though he has said that it's easy to implant memories into humans. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation said that the only way that therapists have the only way that people have memories like ritual abuse is if therapists put the memory in. And so it's kind of interesting that Jolly West, he was willing to say that he was capable of implanting memories, but then he went on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and then the CIA said that it was impossible to plant memories. John Gittinger, when he testified before the Church Committee, said we can implant memories. And then Jolly West shows up again in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. There were 2 or 3 of those CIA guys in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
Right, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's like guys like that. It's like the wolf that the Harvey Keitel character in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Yes.
They just get we need a false memory guy.
Yeah, come on in. And then not him, but this lady sort of pick up the torch. There's a woman, I believe, who does that sort of advising, and she consulted on like the Epstein trial and stuff. I don't remember her. I'm forgetting her name right now, but basically she serves the same role as Jolly West in doing being like, oh, it's fake. They made up what they were saying.
Of Margaret Sanger. Possibly?
I think it is that. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
She's made millions of dollars globetrotting and testifying at, and a number of those False Memory Syndrome Foundation people have. One of them, Harrison Pope, testified for Boys Town, saying that there's no such thing as
Nick, you'll love this.
As dissociative amnesia.
I'll tell him. Right after finishing reading your book, Nick, I got a targeted Instagram ad for donate money to Boys Town.
Which brings you back to the Big Brother. That's the other thing.
I read it in hard copy. I read the actual paperback. It was not like I was typing it in anywhere on my phone whatsoever.
It just shows you that Orwell underestimated that he didn't think you were going to buy your own telescreen and carry it around in your pocket everywhere.
Good old Boys Town.
Yeah.
He ain't heavy. He's my brother.
They sue everybody, but they didn't sue me. So that was kind of interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. You had receipts, Nick. That's why.
Have you ever feared for your life because of this stuff? Because it does seem like bad things have happened to people who've done less than you.
Yeah, Troy Bonner's brother there, and Alicia Owen's brother.
I had that one death threat early on.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the book.
I mentioned in the book, but then there's been a lot of strange phone calls over the years. I haven't had any recently.
Yeah.
But there's been some other things that are pretty strange too. But yeah, I think.
Well, you're talking to us for one. That's pretty out there.
What's interesting to me is that I think I really went through very hard times financially. After I published the Franklin scandal, and I think that dark malignant corner of intelligence said, well, we don't have to worry about Nick Bryant anymore. And then in 2015, I published Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And I also put up Epstein's Black Book on the internet. So, and then the IRS knocked on my door shortly thereafter.
What a coincidence.
Too funny. I mean, it's not funny. I'm sorry, actually, but it's funny, not funny, haha, funny, weird.
Yeah. Well, I think standard operating procedure, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. The IRS has been used as a tool quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
So we should talk about Epstein, because I know we're trespassing on your time at this point.
Put in a plug for
yes, please.
Yeah.
EpsteinJustice.com. At this point, the American people are not going to wake up without a little help.
Yeah.
And with Epstein, everybody in America knows that something stinks with Jeffrey Epstein. Everybody knows it.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it was one of the memes of 2019.
It's up to us to mobilize and make sure that we drill. If you drill on Jeffrey Epstein and you auger into that issue, you will come across a cesspool that runs America. The cesspool that makes sure politicians create legislation that causes wealth polarization. The cesspool that makes sure politicians pass laws that completely trample on our constitutional rights.
Right.
Yeah.
That cesspool. I think that is the only thing that can wake people up. And plus, Jeffrey Epstein molested all these girls with impunity, him and his fellow perpetrators, for 25 years.
Yeah.
Right.
And nothing has happened to the perpetrators.
Yeah,
nothing has happened to the perpetrators. I mean, some of them have given up millions of dollars, but Citibank gives up, or JP Morgan gives up $290 million. That's not even going to dent JP Morgan.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
with your listeners, I definitely ask them to check out our organization, EpsteinJustice.com.
Yeah. And to say to our listeners, think to yourself, why were those kids in McMartin Health daycare in the first place? It's because their mothers had to go to work because they're debt slaves, because of the system we live in, and it's never going to change.
And precarity, yeah.
It's self perpetuating.
It's Ouroboros.
Yeah.
Ouroboros. Some friends of mine had a rock band when I was in high school called Ouroboros.
It's a cool name. I gotta hand it to them for that. Yeah.
But I think you're
the band wasn't that good, but I always liked.
Hey, the name was
You're right that like the Epstein thing in the public consciousness is the loose corner of the sticker where you can get hold of it and cleanly pull it off.
That's what I believe, and we need more people to join EpsteinJustice.com. Right. We started a couple of months ago, and we're moving in the right direction. We just we need some more people to come aboard. We also need help with financing. When you're starting a movement like we are, it's and actually Alicia Owen is one of the associate directors.
Awesome.
Epstein Justice. When you're starting a movement like we are, going up against the mainstream media and the government. It takes a tremendous amount of resources, but here's the thing: the civil rights movement did it.
Yeah.
The gay rights movement did it. There's been a number of movements over the years that have stood up to the power and gotten things done. The women's rights movement, going back to the early part of the 20th century, the unions.
Sure.
Right. Unions,
So-
yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. I mean, that shaped
mean-
shaped the work week.
Yeah.
So
I mean, not to be a grouch over here, but literally all those movements you made were all infiltrated by intelligence.
Yes, and Gloria Steinem literally was
watch
a
your back,
CIA agent. Yeah.
well, I've got some information on Gloria that she said she was involved for 2 years, but it's kind of looking like she was involved for at least 7.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In my next podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about Gloria Steinem and
Miss
her
Magazine.
partner of 9 years, Stan Pottinger,
Yeah.
who was one of the attorneys that helped cover up the Epstein. Now Epstein is in the final cleanup phase, and they brought in
Right.
someone really dirty and corrupt. His name was Stan Pottinger, who, if you look at all the things that Stan Pottinger has covered up, he's like the Forrest Gump of cover-ups. He helped cover up Wounded Knee, helped cover up Martin Luther King. He helped cover up the assassination of Leterrier, I believe his name was, the Chilean ambassador in the United States whose car blew up.
Oh, interesting.
He's been a busy guy. He helped cover up COINTELPRO. He's been busy, and actually he helped cover up Richard Helms was busted lying to Congress, saying that the CIA didn't give any money to opponents of Salvador Allende. And also he said that, and this is kind of interesting, that the CIA never conducted domestic surveillance. And he was outed on both those lies, but Stan Pottinger took care of it for us. So,
Yeah.
Oh, what a guy. What a mensch.
Yes.
and now he was writing novels, and then he comes out of retirement to work
To
with
cover up
David
Epstein,
Boies.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
To
Wow.
cover up Epstein. And that Epstein fund is it's very corrupt. I know 2 therapists who have clients who were molested. These are esteemed therapists. Their clients were molested by Epstein when they were under 10 years old.
Oh man.
Epstein et al. And they weren't allowed to get any of those funds
Yeah.
because the
absurd.
mainstream media and the government have settled that 14 years old was the youngest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is part of the thing, like
The limited hangout.
that's why you get to hear about Prince Andrew, because that's a girl who was 17.
Yes.
So they're like, it's limited hangout. Yeah, that's what it is. Isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Coined
Didn't,
by John Ehrlichman in reference to Watergate, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah. Brings us back to Tricky Dick.
Yeah.
Not
It's
tricky
very
enough.
funny. Ehrlichman and Haldeman and Nixon and Mitchell, they had no idea what hit them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll get to read about it in my book.
I'm
and I want
excited.
to tell your audience, EpsteinJustice.com.
Right.
Yes.
EpsteinJustice.com.
Well, thank you very much.
Join us as we march towards a better world.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. And really, sincerely, thank you for being on the side of good. And I know you've done, I can't really imagine what you've sacrificed and been through to do this. But it's people like you and Alicia Owen who do, even a jaded person like me, you give us some hope that there are some good guys out there.
Well, I guess it's a good thing I'm a masochist.
Yeah.
It works out for the universe, Nick,
Yes.
that you are.
You guys have a great night.
Yeah.
You
Thank
too,
you
man.
very much.
Thank you, man.
Bye.
Bye.
Peace. And for us, www.historyhomos.com, or find us wherever you find podcasts. We're also available on Odyssey, BitChute, Rumble and Rockfin. That's www.rokfin.com/historyhomos, and you get all of our video episodes there free, just like YouTube. Or if you're feeling like you want to get more History Homos content, you can get access to once weekly bonus episode every Thursday just by signing up on our page there for a small monthly fee. And so yeah, other than that, follow us across social media at History Homos Pod. You can join us in our Telegram chat, t.me/History Homos chat. Yeah, die with dignity. William, is there anything else you want to say?
EpsteinJustice.com.
EpsteinJustice.com. EpsteinJustice.com. EpsteinJustice.com. Later, homos.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs, mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop.